Hey, what's up, guys? Shane here, doing your daily devotions for March 31st. We're going through 1 Corinthians 7, which, you always hear pastors out there go, oh man, this is my favorite verse, or this is my favorite chapter. This chapter in particular is one, it always convicts me when I read it. It's about marriage. It's about relationships. Paul is speaking to the Corinthian church, which in my opinion resembles VBF to its finest degree. A bunch of mismatched people coming together for a common goal and a common purpose. But as you can imagine, the church, as it's first started back here in the New Testament, they got things going on. They don't have it all right. They need some guidance. They need some wisdom. I think it's so funny that thousands of years later, we can still have some of this stuff apply to our lives. But Paul is an overview speaking about marriage and relationships in this is, in my opinion, really speaking about commitment. The underlying issue that Paul's speaking to when he's giving the people that are married advice or the people that are single advice is commitment, right? You hear him talk about the marriages in the beginning of this chapter, and he says, be committed to one another. And then when he talks later on in the chapter, he's speaking to the single people. He's saying, I wish that you were like me, because if you were like me, you'd be single, and the number one focus that you'd have in your life, the number one thing that you would commit to would be the Lord. And so as we read through a couple of these verses and I pull out some points, understand that God cares about our commitment. Now, when we're committed to our relationships that we have here on earth, that really correlates with how well we are going to be committed to the Lord. But let's go ahead and start reading. 1 Corinthians 7, verse 1 says this, Now concerning the things about which you wrote, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. But because of immoralities, each man is to have his own wife, and each woman to have her own husband. The husband must fulfill his duty to his wife, and likewise also the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise also the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Stop depriving one another, except by agreement for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer and come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. By this I say by way of concession, not of command. What I got out of these first few verses, and I think is, and I know this shouldn't need to be said in our day and age, but I still believe that there are some people out there that take this authority out of context. I do believe that God created order. The husband, the Christ is the head, right? And then you have the husband and the wife and submission and things of that nature. But when you hear the word authority, I do believe that there are still us husbands out there that lord it over our wives. Now, Paul, in the context of being intimate with your spouse, is saying, listen, don't deprive each other because you'll give foothold to Satan. Guys, I know for some of us out there, we love this verse. But the idea that I got out of this morning is, although I may have authority over my wife, it is not something to be lorded over. It is something that is precious. And her the same. She has authority. It says, as Paul says, I don't have authority. Men, you don't have authority over your bodies either. Your wife does. Now, not just in talking about the intimacy part of marriage, but I do believe that men, in Ephesians, we often forget that verse that follows, that we're to treat our wives as Christ did the church. That means sacrifice. And if you think of the monumental level of sacrifice that Jesus made for us, the word authority kind of finds itself in the background and the word service begins to surface. The way that we can treat our wives, or the way that this hierarchy is best suited, is when each of us, husband and wives, are serving the other person. Moving on, he goes on to say, Paul in verse 8, he says, "But I say to the unmarried and to the widows that it is good for them if they remain even as I." And skipping down towards the end of the chapter, he kind of supports this comment, but he says this in verse 32, "But I want you to be free from concern. One who is unmarried is concerned about the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But one who is married is concerned about the things of the world, how he may please his wife. And his interests are divided. The woman who is unmarried and the virgin is concerned about the things of the Lord, that she may be holy, both in body and spirit. But one who is married is concerned about the things of the world and how she may please her husband." This is a message I really got. I was thinking, because I used to be the college pastor here at VBF, and myself, I've even fallen prey to this, that when you're single, it's as if you can't wait a single day longer to be married. You can't get married soon enough. You're often thinking, and again, I'm not really a big fan of the grass is greener on the other side mentality, because I think on either side of the fence there's junk there. But when we're single, all of you single people out there that are in such a rush to get married that you think that that's going to fulfill your life, I encourage you to take a step back and acknowledge the pros, the blessings, the opportunities that your singleness affords you now. Because most of us that are married, although I don't want to say this and sound as if I have any regrets about being married, I don't. I love my wife and I love my kids, and there's no place that I'd rather be, but I wish I would have taken the time to realize the opportunities I had, the moments that I had, the time that I had when I was single, to serve the Lord and do things for other people that I'm not necessarily lucky enough to have now, because most of us know, again, as we're married, life is busier. So again, to you single people out there is no rush. And I've said this from the pulpit before, I am not a big fan of those that once you find that person, you rush to get married because you don't want to fall into sin sexually. What happens is we rush so much into sin or into marriage when we become Christians because we don't want to sin, that more often than not, we find ourselves in a worse place, a place of divorce or bitterness shortly down the road, because we didn't think about what the commitment that we were making in being married. So again, just a word for those of you that are single and you're eager: learn to slow down and appreciate where you are. The next part I got out of the devotions this morning was Paul's talking to the wives of the husbands and those that have spouses that are unmarried. And he says something that's really profound. He says it in verse 16. He says, "For how do you know, O wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, O husband, whether you will save your wife?" Speaking to those that if your unbelieving spouse wants to live with you, and obviously we're not talking about abusive relationships, but if your unbelieving spouse wants to live with you, you have no idea the impact that you can have on them by the way that you live out your walk with Christ in front of them. You have no idea. We have no idea in our kids the power of the way that we live out our walks with God in front of them. That we don't know. We might be able to save their lives. The last thing that I got out of the devotions this morning was found in verses 17 through 20. But it's this idea that in the beginning church, people were trying to still push the old religious customs. You had a mixture of the Jews that walked according to the law, and you have these new converts that now Jesus is the new faith and the new way. And when they came into this church, there was this rub, because the new gospel was that Jesus and faith is the way to heaven. But some of these old Jews couldn't let go of those old customs, so they would come through the doors, and immediately these new converts were met with these old custom, old religious ways, putting burdens on people. And Paul had to put a stop to this and say, hold on. If you came to Christ and you were circumcised, don't wish to be uncircumcised. If you came to Christ, you were uncircumcised, don't wish to be circumcised, which was a big cultural thing to the Jews. It was actually a command that God had given to the people of Israel. But Jesus came and started a new covenant. The idea behind all of this is that God called you specifically. Some of us have come from pretty bad places. We've done pretty bad things. Some of us have some pretty quirky character traits. But the fact of the matter is that when we come through the doors of church or wherever it is that we make a commitment to Jesus Christ, that God cares more about his relationship with you and walking with you and changing you from the inside out than he does us folding into a religious, rule-based system. Fall in love with Jesus. Those are the things that I got out of the devotions this morning. Again, one thing is guys, we don't want to lord our authority over our wives. The hierarchy that God has created, we don't lord that over our wives. Two, the second thing that we got out of today is that single people, don't be in a rush. You don't want to be in a rush to get to the other side of the fence. Enjoy the freedom that you have. Seize the opportunities that God gives to you now. Husbands and wives, if you live with an unbeliever, you have no idea the ministry opportunity that you have in front of you. And last but not least, know that God cares about a relationship with you. You falling in love with him more than a list of rules and religious customs. That's all I got for you. Hopefully one of those things speaks to you and you have a great rest of your day.